I want to begin today by talking about the global COVID-19 picture, however, and the current status of the pandemic internationally. That's, I'm sure, going to prompt some questions around our managed isolation facilities. And of course, it is a reminder of why we have the managed isolation facilities in place in the first place, to keep New Zealand and New Zealanders safe from the global threat that's posed by COVID-19. The current international situation reinforces the absolute imperative of continuing to take a staunch risk-based approach when it comes to dealing with COVID. Internationally, the cases of COVID-19 are surging again. An increase of 20% in cases over the last 2 weeks of July, with more than 500,000 new cases being reported each day, underscores the fact that COVID-19 and the global pandemic continues to rage. The World Health Organization is reporting that the Delta variant has now spread to 132 countries and continues to spread to more. Cases are on the rise in multiple continents, including Africa, Asia, North America, and Oceania. In the United States, a renewed surge in cases has seen its 7-day rolling average of daily cases increased by more than 500% over the past month to an average of almost 80,000 new cases every day. Closer to home, Fiji sees cases also accelerating, with an average of 1,000 cases reported each day over the last week. There are currently more than 22,500 active cases in Fiji, and those are the ones that are reported. The World Health Organization continues to warn that many people are mistakenly seeing the pandemic is coming to an end. It is not. And that's why our managed isolation program has to continue to be very careful in its balance of keeping COVID-19, and particularly the Delta variant, out of New Zealand, whilst also allowing New Zealanders to return home and bringing in critical workers to support New Zealand's recovery. These are just some of the factors that we're balancing around managed isolation. Every extra MIQ space we open up increases risk. We already bring in 4,000 people, the equivalent of a small New Zealand town, every fortnight. We bring in around 3 times more people per capita than Australia does through its managed isolation facilities. More than 10% of those places are being used every month to support workers coming into the country that are supporting the recovery. And across the Tasman, Australia's recent outbreaks can be traced back to managed isolation. So even if people are vaccinated and around the MIQ system, there is still risk there, and we need to do everything we can to minimise that risk. So for these reasons and more, the government will continue to take a very staunch approach at the border, and that will limit the number of people who are able to come into New Zealand. So turning now to vaccinations, and some good news today. I'm very pleased to announce that yesterday we delivered our 2 millionth dose of the COVID-19 Pfizer vaccine. Among the 42,200 doses that were delivered yesterday, the biggest to date yet that we had on record. And DHBs continue to track at around 3% ahead of their national plan. I also want to acknowledge the support and commitment of major employers who are throwing their weight behind workplace vaccinations. More than 250 submissions have been received from employers who are asking to become workplace vaccination sites. These applications are currently being assessed by an evaluation panel. Mainfreight and Fonterra are the initial pilot work sites. They'll be followed by the Warehouse Group and Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. And I want to thank those employers and all the others who have expressed an interest, committed to keeping their workers safe and to playing their part in ensuring that New Zealanders all have access to the COVID-19 vaccine. So a brief run through of our best yet week for COVID-19 vaccinations. Our 25th shipment of the Pfizer vaccine arrived on Tuesday. 214,000 doses of that shipment will stay in Auckland at the distribution centre for distribution from there, and the remaining 143,000 doses have been sent to the Christchurch depot for distribution from there. As of midnight last night, 2,021,024 doses of the vaccine have been administered, an increase of 261,800 doses on this time last week. Within that, 769,700 New Zealanders have now been fully vaccinated, receiving the 2 doses recommended. There are around just over 950,000 active bookings in the national booking system. More than 317,000 bookings have been made since the 60 to 64 cohort began being able to book last week. So as usual, the Ministry of Health will be releasing the detailed statistics. They'll be going out right about now. A couple of other points on vaccine. I do want to reiterate that we are mindful of equity considerations in our vaccine. We're seeing really good numbers from Māori and Pacific communities in terms of as proportions of the population, a high uptake rate there, but we need to be extra vigilant to ensure that our forward bookings are also going to continue to uphold that high rate of vaccination in Māori and Pacific communities. And it does appear that we've still got some more work to do there, so we'll be monitoring that very closely. I'll be getting a breakdown of the forward-looking bookings from an equity perspective so that we can run the ruler over that, and we'll be doing that shortly. I am, however, pleased to announce today that bookings for the 55-plus age band will open on Friday. That's 5 days ahead of our original schedule. We're able to bring this group forward because of the great response from the earlier groups and because DHBs have been continuing to add capacity through their vaccination programs to vaccinate more people and faster. So we're on track to ensure that every eligible New Zealander has the opportunity to be vaccinated by the end of this year. People in this 55 plus age group who haven't already been vaccinated, they can expect to get invitations or go to book my vaccine from Friday. Calling 0800 28 29 26 between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. 7 days a week is another way that they'll be able to make an appointment. If I could stress, the bookings for them open on Friday, not today, but we are announcing today that they will open for that group on Friday. I also want to provide reassurance that nobody who's currently booked in will be disadvantaged by the fact that we are extending out the eligibility to the next group and therefore increasing demand for the vaccines, because we are confident that we have the capacity in the system to be able to deliver that. So thanks to everybody who has booked their vaccine, a particular thanks to our frontline workers who are delivering those, and we look forward to continuing to see that good progress. We have our eyes firmly fixed, of course, on the end of August, where we expect over the next few weeks to deliver the next 1 million doses, much faster than the first 2 million doses that we've been delivered. So I'll now hand over to Megan Main for a quick update from MIQ, and then we'll open up for questions.
Thank you, Minister. Kia ora, everyone. I know that available space in managed isolation is of great interest at the moment, and I also know that it's incredibly frustrating and distressing for people who are sitting offshore in front of their computers, constantly refreshing that MIAS page. And that lack of uncertainty can be quite upsetting for people overseas and their families here as well. If I could use an analogy to explain our capacity, it'd be booking tickets at a sports event. And of course, MIQ is so much higher stakes, but people understand when they're booking for a sports event, it happens in a venue with a set capacity. And once tickets sell out, it's because the venue's full. That's disappointing for people who miss out, but they understand there's finite capacity. And there's also finite capacity within our MIQ system, and that's for a very good reason. COVID, as the Minister has said, is raging around the world, and our fundamental role for MIQ is to help to keep New Zealand safe. We want to keep COVID out of New Zealand, and part of this is managing the flow of people into the country. Personally, I know I and the team want to be able to bring everyone home who wants to return, but we have to do that in a safe, managed way. And for MIQ here in New Zealand, that's around that 4,000 rooms every 2 weeks. What we're effectively doing is filling 4,000 person capacity sports events every 2 weeks, but with a number of additional complicating factors, not least of which is the mass disruption to travel all around the world and the uncertainty that creates about whether planes will leave, whether everyone who's booked on a plane will be able to book, and so on. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet, but we want everybody to be able to get home when we can fit them in. We know that won't be when people want to, and unfortunately that's the reality of life in a global pandemic. And unfortunately, in periods of high demand, some people are going to miss out on the spots that they want. They'll miss out on securing a voucher regardless of the system or the process that we use. What I can say is we are working hard on making the system as fair as possible, given the difficult circumstances we're in. And I'd also add that we do have spaces set aside for people who do need to get back urgently, and that is a last resort and a high threshold, but that's there for those urgent cases. I'd also like to touch on something to do with our workforce. MIQ's served New Zealand well. We've helped to bring back 160,000 people into the country from over 180 countries overseas, while also playing our role in protecting the considerable freedoms that we have here in New Zealand. And our border and our MIQ workforce are really the frontline defence against COVID for New Zealand. So every day in MIQ, our team of roughly 4,500 people go to work and put themselves between us and the virus, and it's thanks to them really that we can enjoy the freedoms we do. They do deserve our thanks, but unfortunately they're not always treated with kindness in their communities and in their extended community circumstances. So we've recently launched a campaign called Treat Me Fairly. It's a way for our workers to report incidents of discrimination or stigmatisation or being treated differently simply because they work in MIQ. It's a safe, private, confidential way for them to let us know what they've encountered so that we can help to put better support in place and improve the communication. MIQ workers and their families should expect to be treated no differently than other people when accessing services such as healthcare, education, going to the bank, renting a flat, or purchasing the goods and services that they need. Quite simply, if they don't come to work, then nobody will be able to get back to New Zealand. And so I personally want to express my sincere thanks again to our MIQ workers, each and every person working there, and I'd like to ask New Zealanders to do the same. So if you do happen to meet someone who works in MIQ or at the border, please say thank you and acknowledge the really important role they're playing for all of us in New Zealand. Minister, I'll pass back to you.
Thank you. Jessica.
Question for Megan Main. I think most people overseas understand that there's a finite system. They understand how it works. You talk about making it fairer for people. How will you do that? Because I know we've talked about this a number of times before. What tangible things are you going to do?
Yes, so we will continue to do things to make it fairer. We've made over 200 improvements to the Managed Isolation Allocation System, MIAS as we call it, and even in the last few weeks we've made 32 changes. Some of them are to increase the security, but a lot of them are to do with that user experience and making it easier. One of the big recent changes is that now people don't have to fill in their details each time they refresh the page.
You know about that already. Mm-hmm. So what changes are you making now to make it fairer?
Yes, so we're looking at a number of changes to continue to improve it. Look, there's no silver bullet, and when
Sorry, what are some of those changes? Some specifics.
Sure. So when there are more people wanting to book than there are places, people will miss out. What we want to do is make it fairer so that when we do release vouchers, everybody knows about those. So we're looking at how we can safely and fairly let people know when vouchers are going to be released, particularly those bulk releases that we do every month or so. And I would say that every day we're re-releasing vouchers into the system. And over the last few months, we've averaged over 200 people per day picking up vouchers through that ad hoc process. And we'll continue to look at, there's been discussion of wait lists. I've mentioned ballots. We're working hard on those options as ways to increase the level playing field for everyone.
So from next month, you will let people know when you will release those vouchers.
We're looking at how we can communicate that and how we would, whether we'd have, people who register for that. What we don't want to do is put an extreme load on the system, which then makes it unusable for everybody. So we're doing a lot of testing and trying things to see what's going to help users but keep the system stable.
Are we weeks away or months away?
Oh, look, we will continue to make changes incrementally, but certainly within the next 6 to 8 weeks, we'll be in a position to make some more material changes if they're going to give us what we need. Everything we do has to make it better for the user, and so I don't want to commit to a specific change because we're still testing those.
What's stopping you implementing a wait list? That would surely solve a lot of those problems you've just talked about.
Yeah, we've looked really carefully at a wait list, and when you've got more people wanting to book than there are places, a wait list is likely to move the problem to a different place, and we would still have people who miss out. So whatever we do, some people will get a place and some will miss out. So what we want to balance is the people who need to come back urgently through our emergency allocation and the people who can wait longer. I mentioned last time that we are looking at a ballot as well, and we just need to weigh up what's going to give us the best result during these periods where we've got such higher demand than we've got spaces.
But you saw that this problem coming. You were saying at the start of the year that MIQ was booking up, and you pre-warned that people should be coming home now because there's allocation. So you had lots of pre-warning that you would be in this situation. Why haven't you made these decisions and come to this point much earlier down the track?
I think one of the fundamental points here is, regardless of what system we put in place, regardless of what improvements we make to the current system, there are still going to be people who can't get a voucher or can't come in. We've looked at all of the different options, including other countries allocate space to airlines, and then it's up to the airlines as to how they fill that in. We've got, you could have a lottery where people just enter into a ballot. No matter how you cut it, there aren't going to be enough spaces for everybody that wants to come in, and so there will continue to be some disappointment there.
And so can I just add, over 100,000 people have booked places through MIAS. So MIAS as a system is working. What we've seen since late June is a real spike in demand. So we haven't had this level of demand previously. And that, the way MIAS works is first in, first served effectively to book has served us well, and we're now looking at how to deal with these increased levels of demand.
Quite misleading, isn't it?
We'll come back here.
Quite misleading, isn't it, to talk about finite capacity when you actually set the limit for the number of rooms. A lot of people overseas will say, well, why don't you open up more rooms? Why don't you increase the capacity?
Oh, look, we keep looking at whether there are ways that we can increase capacity and increase utilisation as well. One of the things that we've done is move to a cohorting system, which we currently have suspended because of the Trans-Tasman returnees issue, and we're trying to accommodate more people. But that actually has an impact on the room utilisation. So we're always looking at how we can continue to drive efficiency there so that we can cohort in the most efficient way possible. So there's always things that we're looking at, but there's a limited workforce. One of the reasons that we have been successful in keeping COVID-19 out of New Zealand is that our system is very rigorous. The more spaces there are in that system, the more risk that there is.
What about the 1,000 rooms or so that were kept as contingency now that the Trans-Tasman bubble is effectively paused?
So at the moment they're still being used for the Trans-Tasman and are likely to continue to be used for Trans-Tasman for some time yet to come, bearing in mind that they are now the only way people across in Australia who have been stranded in Australia can come into New Zealand, and particularly for New South Wales, where they didn't get the opportunity and amnesty to return. There's still, as we know, potentially several thousand people who may be looking to return. So that'll take us a while to clear through that. We then have to consider that we've also got a travel bubble with the Cook Islands. We still have to have a contingency there in the event that we needed to do anything in that space. And as the Prime Minister announced on Monday, we've got arrangements coming for one-way travel with other Pacific countries. So there's still going to be a need to have contingency in there in the event that something last minute happens and we need to somehow accommodate a substantial group of people at short notice.
You were asked in the Select Committee today, what does and does not violate the rules for the MIQ booking system. There's a tool available online. You install it into your browser. It'll open a browser window, continually refresh the page, and make a beep when something becomes available. But then you yourself have to go and book a room. Would that be something that would violate the rules?
So, as I said this morning, it's disappointing that we're seeing a market appearing for scripts that can help users, but I really understand that people overseas are desperate to get back. These scripts that alert a user that rooms have become available don't directly violate our terms of use. our terms of use require the user to log in and make that booking themselves. I would clarify that some people can't make that booking themselves. It could be an elderly person or a child, and certainly someone can make that booking on their behalf, but they have their own login and password. Where we're breaching terms of use is where a third party asks the user to give them their login, their password, and all of their personal details.
So as you've already heard us say, one of the things the team are looking at are whether some of the things that people are currently paying to get, we can provide for free. For example, alerting them when we're releasing rooms so that they're not ending up having to pay someone to provide them with that service.
But I would add that, as I mentioned, every day we're re-releasing rooms back into the system, and at the moment that's a couple of hundred rooms per day. So in addition to our large releases, there is a regular flow of rooms back in, and we monitor who's securing those rooms, and we see the pattern of demand that way as well.
Yeah. We'll come back over here.
When do you expect to finish vaccinating group 2? Because on the current numbers, your first dose is probably over the size of group 2, but it's still 82%-ish of group 2 have had their first dose. Sorry. Are you going to get all the way there in the next month?
Look, as I indicated this morning, it's voluntary for Group 2 to be vaccinated. 82% is a good number, but having said that, I'd like it to be higher, and so we'll continue to follow up with them. One of the things we've got is happening at the moment is DHBs working more intensively to make sure that their workforces have been coming forward and getting vaccinated. For frontline health workers, in my view, it's very important that they do that and they take up that opportunity. And so, we'll continue to work on that. But we're not going to slow down the rest of the vaccine rollout because some people in Group 2 have not yet taken up the opportunity. Absolutely confident that everybody in Group 2 has had the opportunity.
Just on the 55 plus opening from Friday, how did you manage to wrangle that? Like, how's it 5 weeks ahead of schedule?
It's 5 days as opposed to five weeks.
Yeah.
And it literally is a question of demand is, we kind of anticipate what we think demand will be when we open up a group. We then look at a point at which we think we're going to need to open up more demand to keep a steady level of demand in the system, and we've reached that point earlier. Part of that is about is simply that the DHBs are continuing to go faster and faster.
Does that mean that the next cohort will be coming in 5 days earlier and the whole thing is shifting, or is it just going to come out the wash?
Ask me again next week when we're talking next week.
On that, how do you balance that? Because people had the definite weeks that they were allowed to book, and I think people like the certainty. Could you flip it around and say, well, actually, you have, instead of saying you're opening it up 5 weeks early, you haven't been able to get as many people in to keep the flow up, which is why you're having to open it up. Sorry to sound like a cynical journalist, but isn't there a bit of that as well?
What it is, when we open, we don't close eligibility. So we open up additional people being eligible. That doesn't mean that if you were in an earlier cohort that you stop being eligible. What we're looking at is how do we make sure that we've got a good steady stream of demand. The last thing I want are vaccinators twiddling their thumbs while the booking system catches up. We want to keep a good steady stream of demand. So opening up new cohorts is very much based on what's the demand in the system.
Is it slightly problematic though that you haven't got that steady stream of demand just with that narrow group?
One of the things that is difficult is it's uneven across the country. And so if we didn't open up the next stage cohort earlier, for some DHBs that wouldn't make much difference to them. For others it would mean that they would have vaccinators standing around with not much demand and not much to do. And that is just a reflection of the nature of New Zealand's population profile. Some populations are different to others. Yes.
How worried are you about the impact of misinformation on the vaccine rollout?
I'm very worried about the potential impact it could have as we reach higher vaccination levels. Once we get up around that 70-80% of eligible people taking up the vaccine, there is a possibility that the vaccine program will slow substantially for the residual group of people because they have received misinformation and are reluctant to come forward and get their vaccine. It is still going to be voluntary, and I want to be absolutely clear about that, notwithstanding what people might have heard from other sources close to this building today. We are not going to be forcing people to be vaccinated, and we have always been clear that that is not going to be the case. But some of the misinformation shared by those very same people is meaning that some people are scared about being vaccinated, and that is very regrettable because the information that they are being told is wrong. People are actively lying and sharing information that is going to cause harm potentially to those people because they wouldn't take up the opportunity to make themselves and their families safer because they have been given information that is incorrect. And I think that's reprehensible.
And when it comes to Group 3, what percentage of Group 3 has been vaccinated so far?
It's difficult to come up on a percentage. I can give you the raw numbers if you like, but the percentages are difficult because, as we've gone through before, they're only ever estimates of how many people are in each group, and some of those numbers shift around a bit. But in terms of the doses delivered so far in Group 3, 484,685 people have received their first dose, 259,699 have received their second dose.
National Immunisation Centre, what's the state of that? Because shouldn't that be the system that gives you this information that you need to know how many are in a group and when they're vaccinated?
The booking, yes, we will be getting more and better information to create what you would call in statistical terms a better denominator for each group. And so yes, as more people go into that system, as that system becomes a more complete record of people who are in the vaccination program, then yes, we'll get a better idea of who's been vaccinated and who hasn't. So I think the team are just working through at the moment the best way of what the most accurate denominator is, so that when we pick a denominator, we don't shift it around. I think one of the things that would undermine confidence is if we picked a denominator and found that it was the wrong one. So,
what's the state of that system at the moment? I mean, how many people's details have been lodged in there and that you know where they're at?
Like I said, I think I gave you the numbers of forward bookings. I'll just come back and see if I can find those again. 955,566 active bookings. So those are people who are waiting to get either their first or their second dose. So nearly 1 million New Zealanders in that booking system at the moment waiting for a vaccine. We are delivering, as you've seen, more than 250,000 vaccines a week now. So we're seeing some good momentum there. They won't be waiting months and months to get those vaccines, but we want to make sure we keep filling that up.
There's criticism from people, like epidemiologist Michael Baker, that you should have a clearer idea of this data and you've known that you've needed it for months, and this National Immunisation Centre should be, the vessel in which you have this information to be able to give us a clear picture of what percentage is vaccinated and what percentage is left.
So one of the things that the vaccine booking system does is, as we pull data in order to send invitations out, we get a better sense of that overall group. Now, we're pulling that data from a number of different sources, from DHBs, primary health organisations and so on, and the system is, if you like, being populated as it's doing the work. And so we didn't start with a database of 5 million people. We're building that database as we are sending out the invitations to people.
Ms. Hipkins, can you tell us about the ministerial decision to use approval process? Because we still have AstraZeneca, Janssen and 12 to 15-year-olds with Pfizer. How come that's not going through? Is that not just officials telling some ministers some advice?
So the decision that we made earlier in the year was that we were going to base our campaign this year predominantly on the Pfizer vaccine, based on all of the different pieces of evidence we saw about the Pfizer vaccine, its safety, its efficacy in particular, based on the strengths of being able to predominantly roll out one vaccine, and I have not regretted that decision once. When you look around the world at how effective our current vaccine is, a lot of countries who are using a variety of different vaccines are all now scrambling to try and move to using the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines instead of some of the other vaccines they've been using. In terms of where we sit with the other vaccines, I've had conversations with Johnson & Johnson, the Janssen manufacturers of Janssen. They, at this point, are indicating that supply could still be some time away. And so there's no real pressure on us making a decision to use there, because even if we did, we wouldn't be able to get that supply. So we're in conversations with them about what that means, because obviously there's some commercial discussions that go on around that, but they are experiencing supply issues globally, and New Zealand is part of that equation. In terms of AstraZeneca, at this point we don't have an intention to use AstraZeneca in New Zealand, but the approval does provide us with more opportunities to receive the vaccine and share it with partners who wish to use it.
Just on your message to anti-vaxxers, I mean, there's a group of people outside Parliament now waving all sorts of flags. They've got placards that say masks are for slaves. What's your message to those people?
Just be informed. Speak to people who can provide good, factual, impartial information. If you don't trust politicians, a lot of New Zealanders don't, speak to your local GP, speak to someone who is working in the health system and ask them for factual, reliable information, because a lot of the information that those people are being given is just downright wrong.
Minister, on Māori vaccination rates, the theory behind having a group 3 is that this is a group of people who is at higher risk if they were to catch COVID-19. We've seen evidence, and modelling that shows that a younger Māori person might have the same level of risk as an older Pākehā person. Why shouldn't the group 3 restrictions, or just the age brackets in general, be different for Māori and Pacifica who are more likely to be at risk at a lower age? Do you see what I'm saying here?
I think the Cabinet did weigh all of that up when we decided the rollout framework. One of the things that you would have seen us do in the cohort most at risk around South Auckland, where we know we've got high concentrations of Māori and Pacifica people, we did have a slightly different approach there to target those who were more at risk. Ultimately, though, we want a clear and nationally consistent rollout so that everybody knows where they sit within that. We're working as fast as we can to get to everybody, and as I said, we've just opened up another age cohort, which is, I think, encouraging, which will include a much greater proportion of at-risk Māori and Pacific New Zealanders. Jessica.
When you talked before about new rooms being released every day, and you said a few hundred each day are being released, how many of those rooms are being released? Because anecdotally we're hearing that it's really tough to get a space, but from what you're saying, it sounds like it should be a lot easier.
So the rooms are being released, but the number of people trying to get those rooms is incredibly high, and so they're being snapped up quickly by regular users. And so it really comes back to the number of people trying to get those spaces compared to how many we've got available. Our focus is on making as many of those rooms available online. And so when people's plans change, we ask them to let us know. We send reminders to people who are booked to travel so that if their plans are changing, or, for example, if they don't pass their pre-departure test, we find out as early as possible so we can get those rooms back into the system, because every room is someone who can come home.
Do they get released all at one time each day, and could that be an answer to some of the issues of people refresh?
Yeah, it's a good question. What we try to do is balance it across time zones. So in every choice here, there's a trade-off around how we balance keeping it simple with making it fair, and also making it understandable. And no system is perfect. Something that I'm keen to do is to provide more information to the public around what we're doing with our rooms. We do a lot of work to try and optimise the system, but I think we can definitely be more upfront around what some of the challenges are. For example, when rooms are offline for maintenance, for ventilation, there's more information we can give to explain why we've got the capacity we've got.
Joe, up the back.
Just to come back to Mark's question, given the variations that you have with what is effectively a postcode lottery with the rollout, isn't it a bit of a laugh to say, well, you want the system to be clear and age groups to be clear and not prioritise Māori, who we know have that 10-year difference in terms of life expectancy? Is it really adding a complication and a confusion when, let's face it, there's a massive complication and confusion from DHB to DHB as it stands anyway?
I think to say that we're not prioritising Māori and Pacific New Zealanders who are more at risk, I think is incorrect. There are different ways that we've reached into those communities, including through the whānau-based approach that we've taken to the rollout, particularly in communities where there's high concentrations of Māori and Pacific people. And you've seen that in Northland. So I don't think, and we're working very closely with Māori and Pacifica health providers to make sure that the vaccines are being delivered through people who those communities will trust. So I think there is a lot of emphasis going on there. So I don't think it's right to say that we're not factoring that into the rollout of the vaccine. We absolutely are.
But then you've also got a situation where, and I'm sorry to harp on about it, but you've got Taranaki, who is not only behind the ball in terms of every tier, but it's also disproportionately not vaccinating Māori as well. So if you've got discrepancies going on, which we do, and I don't think anyone can dispute that, then why not actually just work harder to get more Māori vaccinated faster?
So within the DHBs, within each DHB, we are looking closely at those stats in terms of how they are doing in terms of reaching the proportions of their population. So where a DHB is reaching a lower percentage of their Māori and Pacific eligible population, that is something that we're looking very closely at, and we'll continue to work with them to make sure that they're remedying that.
To them, because I mean, I hear most weeks from you and Dr. Bloomfield, we're talking to them. That's not achieving anything. Clearly, they are doing no better than they were before.
It's not just DHBs. I'd remind everybody that groups 2 and 3 and beyond, vaccination is voluntary. So there's two parts of this. One is the work the DHBs are doing to reach into those communities, and the second is the willingness of those communities to come forward and to be vaccinated. We'll come down here. You've had a pretty good go. Yeah.
How are you going at bringing GPs into the vaccination program, or onboarding, as some people like to call it?
Yeah, look, sorry, I don't have the exact numbers, but the feedback I've had is it's very encouraging, very positive. As you know, Dr. Bloomfield's not here to give us the latest, but we can certainly get you some later numbers. Derek?
Jerry, are you happy with how the ministry has been doing that? Because, given the DHB's own targets, you're going to have 500 to 600,000 doses sitting in the freezer at the end of August, when those primary care practices potentially could have been brought
so let me
just, and those vaccines could have been used.
Let me just run headfirst into that particular argument. You would have heard me say here several weeks ago now that the strategy of building up a reserve of vaccines was a deliberate one. The last thing we want to do is be in a position where if a plane is late, a whole lot of people who had vaccines booked find their vaccines have been cancelled. We won't get that many, we won't build up to that many. We're aiming to get up to at least a week's supply though, which could be up to, did you want my answer, or would you like to do the press conference? Okay, so the issue is we are deliberately building up a reserve of vaccines. That is a deliberate strategy.
I understand that. But
right.
It's a very large reserve, is it not?
No, it's not. It's less than 2 weeks.
That would be
less than 2 weeks. That would be less than 2 weeks of supply.
People's arms, and then 300,000.
Back to MIQ.
Yes, questions.
Back to MIQ. Are you concerned that people are being forced to overstay because they can't get an emergency spot or a spot in MIQ? Overstay, in the countries that they're in because they are unable to return to New Zealand by the end of their visa or for whatever situation they're in? We
do have an emergency allocation, and one of the criteria for that emergency allocation is that you cannot remain in the place that you are in.
Are you confident that that criteria is being upheld correctly?
It's certainly being upheld in the applications that are being processed. Whether people who are overstaying in another country are applying for emergency allocation is over to them, of course. But if they are in a position where they have to leave wherever they are because they're not legally allowed to remain, that is one of the criteria that makes them eligible for an emergency spot.
Sorry, but you're confident with how that process is working, that people aren't being sort of turned away incorrectly?
So in terms of that criteria, because it's a high bar for an emergency allocation, we do ask people to provide evidence that they've got no other options other than to come back to New Zealand. And so as long as we've got that level of assurance, then I'm confident that the process is working well.
Can I just make one other observation about allocation spaces for MIQ or people asking for early access to the vaccine and so on? One of the things that I've seen consistently over the last 6 months or so are a number of cases reported in the media that tug on people's heartstrings, where the information people supply through the media is more comprehensive than the information that they supplied when they were applying for one of those particular exemptions. And had they supplied that degree of detailed information in their application probably would have been approved when it had been declined. So my message, I guess, to people, and I'm not blaming the media in any way for this is about the people who are doing the applications, give us absolutely every piece of information that you can, because the more complete your application is, then the more likely it is to be approved.
Are you confident, though, that your forms are asking for enough information and that there is enough opportunity for these people to do it? Because obviously they're so freely sharing all of this information. They've got screenshots, they've got bank accounts, they provide that to the media. Are you confident that your systems are asking for enough information that you can make informed decisions?
Yes, I am confident that we make it very clear on the website and on the online form what people need to provide, and we've continued to improve that. You know, it goes back to we stood these things up quickly. Originally, it was a form you had to print out and write on, and so we've put a lot of effort into the information and the education that we provide up front so that we can process those applications as quickly as possible.
Yes, in the middle here.
Sorry, thank you. Is a mass vaccination event likely for Christchurch?
We do have more mass vaccination events in the works. I haven't yet received the final list of those. Obviously, I think we're waiting to get the lessons from the weekend before finalising that and locking that in. So we'll once that is locked in, we'll release that so that people know what's coming up. One of the things that I've been told is a consideration here is there's actually only so many venues in New Zealand that could do an event of that size and scale, and so that's one of the factors, and they tend to be quite heavily booked up. So getting them available and then getting them available a period of time afterwards for the second follow-up event can be challenging. But a lot of very active work was happening before the trial. Now that the trial's complete, they'll be looking to lock as much of that down as possible.
Wellington and Canterbury
Last few questions, yeah.
Are, other than Taranaki, the sort of lowest in terms of per capita vaccination rates. Is this an issue of, you know, they've hit the, you know, the barrier for, they've vaccinated all the people in their eligible populations, and there's some of those that will most benefit from advancing the group timetable a little bit, or is it a hesitancy issue in these areas?
Look, I don't have a breakdown of you know, hesitancy versus other factors, but I think we'll get more of a sense of that as we move along. But I don't have a good sense of that at this point. You can have the last question, Derek.
Do you have any update on the Pfizer for 12 to 15-year-olds, mandatory QR code scanning at bars, restaurants, and more masking at home?
That's quite a list. In terms of in terms of the masking and the mandatory record keeping, that is something the Cabinet's yet to make final decisions on, but that will happen within the next few weeks. I can say that the issues around defining what the requirements would be is pretty much sorted now, and we'll be able to announce that. The final bit that we've been working through is compliance and enforcement, because there are some quite complex issues around privacy. So, for example, if you make it mandatory for people to keep a record of visiting certain locations, should the liability for that sit with the individual or with the place that they've been visiting? And both of them carry challenges with them in terms of accessing people's information, verifying enforcement and so on. So we've just been working through that. That includes the Privacy Commissioner, Human Rights Commissioner, and a variety of other things. And that's the bit that's taken the longest. And we should be in a position to be able to lock that down in the next few weeks, and then we'll share all of that work. The first part of your question was 5 to 12 to 15-year-olds. As the Director General indicated before, we've been looking for some international evidence around the very rare occurrence of myocarditis in younger people receiving the vaccine before we make that final decision. You'll see that MedSafe issued some guidance about 2 weeks ago, which they've subsequently updated again. So we are continuing to look at that. I would think that the decision around that will be sometime in the next month or so. Having said that, that group won't be eligible until much later in the year. So there's no urgency around that particular decision. Yeah. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.